All right. Well, thank you for joining. So this is my presentation on the theory of planned behavior for the course Introduction to Informatics. So first of all, I want to give some general background on the topic of the theory of planned behavior, since my two articles are about this, and I think in order to understand the content of the articles, you need to know a bit more background knowledge. I needed to know a bit more background knowledge, so that's why I've included this. So, the theory of planned behavior is a theory from the field of psychology, which tries to explain behavior based on three components. So, there's attitude, there's the subjective norms, and there's the perceived behavioral control. The theory says that these three factors give the best approximations um, of approximating behavior. And the theory was proposed by Isaac Ajian in 1985. So there's these three components which are important. I've written them down here. So first we start off with the subjective norm. This is how a person perceives certain behavior. So it's influenced by the norms of people close to the person in question. For example, speaking in a metro is frowned upon. Um, so this is a subjective norm about certain behavior, and it's influenced by other people. Like the person itself might not care about it, but other people say, well, it's not something you should do. Then there's the attitude. So the attitude is quite similar to the subjective norm, but then it's more intrinsic to the person and not influenced by the others. As far, at least if I understood it right, it's kind of like that. So yeah, it's quite similar, but it's not so much influenced by others. Then there's the perceived behavioral control. So does the person in question perceive certain behavior as easy or difficult? So for example, someone could find it difficult to quit smoking, then their perceived behavioral control is that they find it difficult to quit smoking. And so this is quite important for a lot of for planning, for like, how do you say it? Um, for approximating a person's behavior, because if they think something is going to be very difficult to do, they might not even try to do it properly, right? So the theory actually tries to formalize um, this these factors so that a correlation between the factors and behavioral intention, which is the outcome, can be calculated. So this formula is used for it, but since it's out of the scope of the summary, I will not elaborate on it. But you will see in the following articles that the authors will talk about correlations and coefficients and this and that, and then you understand that, okay, well, they use this formula as a sort of most important thing, because in the end it's just three factors, combine them, and there's an outcome which is behavioral intention, which is the behavior or of a person in a nutshell. Okay, then we go on to the first article. So this first article is a editorial. Um, it's called The Theory of Planned Behavior, Reactions and Reflections. So this is actually written by Isaac Ajian, the author of, or like the person, the scientist who thought of the theory of planned behavior. So yeah, let's get into it. So the theory of planned behavior is one of the most cited and influential models for prediction of human social behavior, but partially due to its popularity, it's actually a target of much criticism and debate. So in this article, the author tries to answer and clarify and also engage with some of the critique on the theory. I have to say I found especially this article quite difficult because I'm not that well versed in the subject. So I've tried to pick out the most important but also the best understandable, the items which are best to understand from this topic. So first there's the criticism of the limits of predictive validity. So one of the critiques is the limit of the amount that behavior can be predicted. So these three factors we talked about earlier, named above, rarely exceed 80% of reliability. The most expectations of correlations in the constructs are coefficients of about 60%, and this is due to random measurements errors. And again, this is due to the randomness of the subject. So this relatively low correlation between perceived behavioral control and behavior suggests that the perceptions of control are not completely accurate to serve as a good proxy for actual control. And so in the article, the author agrees on this, kind of. Then the next one, next criticism is irrationality. So a frequently voiced criticism of the theory of planned behavior and other reasoned action models is that they are too rational. So they're not taking sufficient amount of cognitive and affective processes that are known to bias human judgment and behavior. So to say it in different words, humans aren't completely rational. They will often do things which don't make sense, and that's where a lot of social science kind of run into problems. For example, study of economics is based on rational behavior of people in an economic situation, but people aren't rational, so then sometimes your theory fails or fails to predict some kind of behavior because they're not making rational decisions. The counter-argument of the author is that, well, this is a non-argument because there's no assumption in the theory of planned behavior that behavioral, normative, and control beliefs are formed in a rational, unbiased fashion, or that they accurately represent reality. So what he says is, well, these irrationality can be in the model, and also it's a model. It doesn't take in everything. So don't be too hung up about the fact that, well, there's irrationality. So the next critique is affects and emotions. So perhaps the most frequently mentioned biasing factors are neglected in the theory of planned behavior, and they're affects and emotions. So a lot of scientists say this is actually missing in the theory of planned behavior. So the emotional aspect of human behavior. And the arguments of the author are twofold. So first he says they are able to serve as a background factor that influences behavioral, normative, and control beliefs. And in addition, affective states also help to select the behavioral, normative, and control beliefs that are readily accessible in memory. So then there's the sufficiency assumption. Several of the studies in this issue address, or at least in part, an issue known as the theory of planned behavior sufficiency assumption. So accordingly to the theory, we should be able to predict performance a behavior from intentions to perform the behavior and from perceived behavioral control. So this is what we talked about in the introduction. These two factors or three factors make you able to predict certain behavior. So several, yeah. Let me see. According to this theory, yeah. So a critique on this is actually that, well, there must be way more predictive factors, predictive variables in this model of planned behavior. And what the author says is actually similar to things we see back in machine learning, like Occam's razor, for example, that you don't always need more variables to get a good outcome. Sometimes it will be very specific to a certain topic, and you will overfit your model, and it will not really help you in the end. So that's his answer to this critique. So then there's the past behavior and the habit. So well, it's known that the past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, since it's supported by a lot of empirical evidence. One possible reason for findings of this kind is methodological, having to do with the nature of intention and behavioral measures. So it should be noted that past behavior fails to meet one of the criteria for inclusion in the theory of planned behavior, which is namely the requirement that it constitutes of a causal antecedent of intention. So this is actually saying, well, it is supported by a lot of empirical evidence, but this is mainly because you're doing this this empirical research. But if you really look at the theory and how people actually work, then this is not really a psychological precursor to behavior. So to conclude on this article, the author says, well, research on, because this is from 2011, the theory is quite old, it's from the 80s, and so it has made a lot of progress since the introduction, and in general it's still a very good way to predict intention and behavior. Alright, so then we move on to the next article. So the next article is called Time to Retire, the Theory of Planned Behavior. It's written by these people in 2014, so after the other paper. And again, this is a paper which has critique on the theory of planned behavior, although this time it's not written by the inventor of the theory, but by other researchers. And so they actually, like they say it in the article, they actually say, well, it's been good with the theory of planned behavior, we made a lot of use of it, and now it's time to move on. Alright, so my PowerPoint is very short-handed, but it's fine, I think. So the theory of planned behavior as we know it is an extension of the theory of reasoned action. It proposes that volitional, which is the power to choose something, human behavior is a function of the intention to perform the behavioral control. Furthermore, intention is hypothesized to be a function of attitudes towards the behavior, the subjective norm, and the perceived behavioral control, like we talked about earlier. A recent systematic review of 237 independent prospective tests found that the theory of planned behavior accounted for 19.3% of variability in health behavior, with intention being the strongest predictor. It was also found that the theory of planned behavior was considerably less predictive of behavior when studies used longitudinal rather than a shortitudinal design. So like a research design over longer time compared to a research design over a shorter time. So it's also less predictive when the participants are not university studies and when the outcomes measures are taken objectively rather than a self-report. So these are quite important criticisms, I think, on the theory of planned behavior. So the authors actually say, well, we should move on from this three-factor model of attitudes, which were thought up in the last century and a long time ago, and we should move on towards a theory of decision making, which is actually built on the insights that we've learned over these past decades. And because we know more, we have more tools to actually make more complicated models, which should hopefully better predict planned behavior. So there's 2 points of criticism. The theory of planned behavior uses only these 4 explanatory concepts. For instance, the theory has been criticized for its exclusive focus on rational reasoning and excluding the role of emotions, like we talked about earlier in the other article. Also, the static explanatory nature of the theory of planned behavior does not help to understand more evident effects on behavior, on cognition, and future behavior. So the main focus of these 2 criticisms have been the limited predictive validity and also the utility of the theory of planned behavior. So to start with validity, main problem is that the theory propositions are patently false. The theory of planned behavior elucidates an explicit, fully specified and statistically testable model describing how behavioral, normative, and control beliefs determine attitudes, subjective norms, and the PBC, so planned behavioral control. So other researchers have demonstrated that this method is actually misleading, and they suggested a range of alternative approaches. So experimental tests have been attempted, and observations have just not been in line with the theory of planned behavior, which provides very good evidence for the lack of its suitability as a theory of behavioral change. What they actually say is, well, if we actually do experiments with people doing things, then they're not doing what the theory of planned behavior actually said they were going to do. So it's false. It doesn't work. Next point of criticism is actually quite short. So it says, well, the utility, the usefulness, when a theory has a useful falsehood in it, it could still be useful. But in this case, you should ask yourself, well, if there's so many wrong things in it, should we still use it? So in the 1970s, this was a great utility which suggested that behavior was not, as what they thought before, a mere reflection of attitudes. So it proposed new explanatory measures new research designs, and it contributed to the development of knowledge. So it's very useful. But now, 3 decades later, the theory of planned behavior really lost its utility. It's no longer a plausible theory of behavior or behavioral change, and it should be allowed to enjoy its well-deserved retirement. All right, so that is it. Not the most easy articles, I think, although the theory of planned behavior is quite easy, maybe in its basis to understand. But I thought the articles themselves were quite complicated, especially if you are not a psychology major. All right, well, thank you very much. That's been my presentation.
Hello everyone, this is Zhang Shunan. Let me continue our presentation. Another paper we choose is Chinese University Students' Acceptance of MOOCs, a Self-Determination Perspective. The topic of our team is also includes the theory of planned behavior and self-determination theory. So before beginning my presentation, I will give you a self-introduction of the two theories. First one, theory of planned behavior. The theory of planned behavior, also called TPB. This behavior makes the process by which individuals form intentions to carry out behavior that is consistent with their self-determined motives. So this theory assumes that an individual's intention to carry out a behavior is a keen determination of execution. According to TPB, intention is determined by 3 different kinds of elements. Firstly, is the likely outcomes of the behavior. So this will influence the attitudes towards the behavior. Secondly, is about the expectations of others and the motivation to fulfill those expectations. This results in the perceived social pleasures to carry out a behavior or not carry out. Lastly, is about the factors that may facilitate or even stop a behavior and the perceived power of those factors. Here, I have also highlighted some key points of the concepts, hopefully give you a better understanding of the basic theory. The second one is self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is a well-established theory of motivation that has been widely adopted to investigate how and why a particular human behaviors occurs. So the center of this theory is the concept of autonomy. Autonomy is defined as the perceived origin or source of one's own behavior. And the opposite of autonomy is control. Human behavior may be encouraged not only by the maybe internal factors known as autonomous motivations, but also influenced by external factors known as controlled motivations. Besides, self-determination theory argues for a controlled to autonomous motivation. So with external factors and internal factors combined together. After briefly introduce the two theories, then I will focus more on the contents of the paper we choose. Actually, this paper is an application of the self-determination theory. So next, I will interpret the paper from the 5 parts. Firstly, the introduction. Secondly, the literature review. Thirdly, the methodology used in this paper. Firstly, the results. Lastly, the implications and discussions of this paper. Part 1, introduction. In the introduction part, the author focus on the background and the purpose of this article. As for the background, on the one hand, higher education today faces many challenges, like the role in society, like the functions within universities, like the concern about maybe substance ability, and lastly about the growing diversity of the student population. So in order to better achieve the teaching revolution and educational system around the whole world is under a greater changing with the rapid development of technology and also development of the information and the communication. So the MOOCs, massive open online courses, are created and developed. Then the purpose. This study examines the cognition and psychological factors that influence students' intention, students' adaptation of MOOCs in China. Part 2 is about the literature review. The author revised the papers from about MOOCs and about the theory of planned behavior, also the research on self-determination theory. After compare this different literature, the author make a conclusion that some researchers also have investigated the role of learner autonomy in open learning environments, such as MOOCs, online distance courses, or online collaborative learning settings. These studies have tended to focus on examining the level of learner autonomy rather than the behavior intention to complete a course. So to further explore the different factors that influence intention to pursue MOOCs, this study is granted more widely on the TPB and self-determination frameworks. According to the literature review part and the purpose of the whole study, the author put forward 9 hypotheses. Here is a picture. The picture shows the different elements mentioned in the hypothesis. Like, for example, the hypothesis 1. It means the author supposed that attitudes towards MOOCs would have a maybe positive effect on the intention to continue using MOOCs. Like maybe hypothesis 2. Hypothesis 2, the author assumes that perceived behavior control towards MOOCs would have a positive effect on the intention to continue using them. Like, for example, maybe hypothesis 6. As the author assumes that controlled motivation while using MOOCs would have a negative effect on attitude towards MOOCs. So these are the hypotheses put forward by the author. Part 3 is methodology used in this paper. Firstly, the author designed a questionnaire from the 6 perspectives and then conduct it. After collecting the data, the author used some ways to do an analysis, like a confirmatory factor analysis, a PACE analysis, and the use of some index. Part 4 is about the results of the questionnaire and the data analysis. Here are 2 tables about the basic statistics of the questionnaire. Table 1 is some basic information about the targets. Like the first one is total number of targets. There are 475 university students in China involved in this questionnaire, involved in this survey. Secondly is the number of males. Males accounts for maybe a half of the survey. Lastly is average age. And then the second picture is the majors. Here means the targets from different majors, like from science and technology, from social science and humanity, and medicine. Last picture is about the results, hypothesis testing results. After analyzing the statistics and the results showing in the picture, we know that hypotheses 3, 6, and 7 were not supported by the results. And the 2 self-determination factors, autonomy, motivation has a positive effect on attitudes, so supporting the hypothesis 4. Last is part 5. Part 5 is the implications and the discussion of this paper. The implications can be concluded from 2 different aspects. Firstly, as for literature, so the integration of the hypothesis highlights the limitations of the original TPP models in a distance learning setting. So such integration connects the behavioral, normative, and control-related belief constructs in TPP to an integrated motivational model. And secondly, as for the practice, the findings provides insights for institutions aiming to start or maybe to improve the efficiency of online learning programs or online learning platforms. So this is the main content of the whole article. Hopefully, I've made a clear summary of the content. Thank you very much. The last paper of our group is Theory of Reasoned Action, Purchase Intention of Young Customers. Since another topic of our group is Theory of Reasoned Action, so at the beginning of my presentation, I will also give you a brief introduction of the theory of reasoned action. The theory of reasoned action is based on the premise that individuals are reasonable and make systematic use of information available to them. So according to the theory of reasoned action, one's behavior intention is based on 2 determinants. Firstly is the attitude towards the behavior, and secondly is the perception of social pleasures to determine whether perform or not perform a behavior. So this is also referred to as the subjective norm. So just like we say in the title, this study is based on the theory of recent behavior. So it's also a combination of the behavior and the purchase intention of young customer. So next, I will focus on the content of the paper from the following 5 parts. Firstly is the introduction. Secondly is the theoretical framework. Thirdly is the methodology used in this paper. Firstly is the results. Lastly is the implications and discussions. Part 1, introduction. In introduction part, the author introduces the background of this paper and then states the purpose of it. The background can be concluded from 4 major points. Firstly is Generation Young is a major force in the marketplace. The number of the Generation Young is increasing dramatically. So it's estimated that there are 286 million people in the United States. Is the Generation Young, belongs to Generation Young. And secondly, members of Generation Young has come of age in a society of technological change and one that is consumer oriented. So the Generation Young is very different from the other generations previous studied. And thirdly, many recognized companies, many mass media companies have substantial budgets to advertise to this group, to the group of Generation Young. Last but not least, although exotic leisure is an important part to the exotic leisure business, this still lacks the knowledge and lacks the understanding, a better understanding of their potential target markets in the United States. So it's very important to put forward to know more about something, to know more about the purchase intention of Generation Young. So in order better fit the needs of Generation Young and then develop an suitable strategy, the author do the research to determine if the theory of reasoned action could be used as a prediction tool in examining purchase intention of a selected customer group and product. So we know the customer group in this paper mainly focus on the Generation Young. Part 2 is about theoretical framework. Actually, this paper is based on the theory of reasoned action. So the model in this paper, in this study, was based on that a previous study and designed to explain relationships between attitude and behavior by using the variable of beliefs, attitudes, behavioral intentions, and behavior. Apart from the theory of reasoned action, mass media were also ended because customers sometimes need more information regarding the products and also suggestions to help them make a better decision about what to buy or what to not to buy. Besides, with a huge number of products showing in the supermarket, necessary information may come from mass media sources. Based on the theory and the purpose of the whole study, the author also puts forward some hypotheses. Here are three hypotheses. Hypothesis 1 is attitude towards the behavior will influence customer purchase intention. Secondly, is about the perception of subjective norm will influence customer purchase intention. Lastly, is the internal variables like fashion involvement, personal characteristics, and media usage will influence customer purchase intention. In order to test the hypothesis, the author used the different methodologies. In this paper, the method is the author designed a 50 minutes written survey and then use SPSS to analyze the data. So here is a table about the questions. Totally, there are 5 questions. The first one is, in general, would you say you buy clothing fashions? And secondly, how much information about new clothing fashions do you give to your friends? Thirdly, with regards to your interests in clothing fashions, would you say you are? And firstly, compared with most others, how likely are you to be asked for advice about new clothing fashions? Lastly, is which one of the statements below best describes your reaction to changing fashions? And here, part 4 is about the results. The first picture is just about the sample. So here is here are the main characters like race, age, status, academic status, and gender of the sample involved in the survey. As the picture showing that most of the sample was white, female, ages from 17 to 21, and single. And this picture is about the factors mentioned in the 3 hypotheses we talked before. The variables are attitude towards purchasing the product of interest. Secondly, is the subjective norm. Thirdly is the fashion involvements. Thirdly, self-confidence, and lastly, self-consciousness. Last picture is the most important part of this picture of this study. Here is the results. The last results according about the test of hypothesis. Like the statistics showing in the picture, we know that hypothesis 1 is supported, but hypothesis 2 and 3 are not supported. So make a conclusion. The results of this study supported the theory of reasoned action as a prediction tool in examining purchase intention of a customer product. And secondly, attitude towards the behavior was the most important predictor variable in the model. Lastly, external variables like fashion involvement, personality characteristics, and media usage did not have statistic influence on the purchase behavior in this study. Part 5 is about the implications. Implications also includes 2 parts. Firstly is the target analysis. Secondly is about the mass media perspectives. As for the target analysis, just as we mentioned in the background part, Generation Young is a large, fast-growing segment of the customer audience. And besides, this group is very different from the previous generational groups. So it's very important to be able to characterize this special group and provide some purchase behavior information to marketers who target this particular group and help them to make a better decision or make a better design, make a better maybe product for the younger generations. And as for the mass media, it's also very important to target the media used by this group for promotion, such as television, fashion magazines, store window displays, and something like that. So according to the motto and theory, a more positive attitude will result in a higher and more positive intent to purchase the products. So this is the implications, or this is the benefits of the paper. So this is the end of the whole paper or whole contents of the paper. Hopefully, I've made a clear summary of the contents. Thanks for your listening. Bye bye.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Here is our discussion part, and then based on the 4 art papers we choose, and our team members have some basic ideas want to share. And firstly, I'd like to talk more about the series we need to introduce. Firstly, is the theory of planned behavior, and secondly, self-determination behavior, and lastly, theory of reasoned action. Actually, from my perspective, I think these 3 kinds of behaviors have some similarities, since the theories can be used to predicate people's behavior, like to predict why and how a particular human behaviors occur. And then I will focus more on the relationship between the theory of planned behavior and the theory of reasoned behavior. Although the theory of planned behavior includes maybe 5 parts, like attitude, like subjective norms, and perceived behavior and control, and intention behavior. But I think this is just a development of the theory of reasoned action, since like I mentioned in the presentation part, the primary basis of theory of planned behavior is that people's behavior or people's action is based on the is reasonable. So from my perspective, I think it's just a development of theory of reason action. Apart from that, I also want to talk about the application of the theories, just like the paper we choose. One is about the purchase intention of young customers, one is about the use of MOOCs in Chinese universities. This is the use of the theories in different or in various disciplines or fields. After reading some paper related to economic, especially the maybe marketing, and I also learned another model about the COMB model. This COMB means the capacity, the opportunity, the motivation behavior model. So maybe later we can explore more about this model. I mean the COMB model with the model of maybe theory of planned behavior or theory of reasoned action to explore more about the maybe customers' behavior, and then put forward more effective strategies for companies for the maybe something this kinds of people to have a better understanding of their target customers. So this is what I want to share about the series we mentioned in our presentation.
Okay, cool. So I thought actually we would like have more like discussion instead of maybe monologue, but I'm not sure how you normally do it. But yeah, so I was wondering, for example, about your articles. So is it possible to explain the interest in the MOOCs with the theory of reasoned behavior or the theory of reasoned action? Do you know that?
I think there is a combination. So just like I mentioned before, from my perspective, there is no big differences between the three theories. It's just to predict or to know better about why and how a particular behavior occur.
Yeah.
So using MOOCs or just like the intention of using MOOCs is also an analysis of people's action or people's behaviors.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting. And do you think, because my articles were about the theory of planned behavior?
Yeah.
So what I read before, because I don't have that much knowledge about these theories because that's completely new to me. But what I read is that the theory of planned behavior kind of evolved from the theory of reasoned action.
Yeah.
And but my articles were mainly about criticisms on the theory of planned behavior.
Yeah.
So the first one was criticisms on planned behavior, theory of planned behavior, which were kind of debunked by the author, by Isaac Ashyan. And then the other one was from other researchers, and they actually said, well, it's time to stop with using the theory of planned behavior. I was wondering, do you think, I'm not sure how much you know about it, but do you think there's still use for the theory of planned behavior? Or do you think what the author said, like it's time to retire it and use different models?
I agree with the last opinion. So
Okay.
just to all things are development.
Yeah.
So this series maybe need to improve continually to meet the maybe researchers' need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe the new series will be put forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 Because I think they name it in this article as well. They say, well, there's, for example, that it lacks in emotions, for example, in the theory.
Yeah, in the paper of MOOCs related to this is Chinese university students' acceptance of MOOCs. Also, this paper is from the perspective of a self-determination.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually, there is also a basics of the theory of planned behavior.
Yeah.
I think there is just basic this kinds of behavior and then put forward some new things.
Yeah.
To
exactly.
just combine.
Yeah. Because just using the one might not have enough predictive power, but if you use the other one, you might get a more complete overview.
So this is the beauty of the maybe combination or maybe the cross discipline.
Exactly.
It's very important to do that recently. Yeah.
All right.
So how about do you think just like I said that I think these three kinds of theories are similar to each other.
Yeah. So I think I don't know too much about the reasoned action.
Oh, reasoned action.
Yeah.
Reasoned action means actually it's based on that the priority that people make decision reasonable. They can control their maybe their behavior by themselves.
Okay, well then it's quite similar, I guess, to the planned behavior. Because I think the self-determination theory is slightly different, maybe, because what I read online, that it's, for example, it's also about you need, I can grab my laptop too, to get a bit more information on it as well. But I think it's sad that there are certain things you need in your life to be able to make certain choices, so have this self-determination. So they say, well, you need these basic psychological needs.
Yeah.
So you need to have autonomy in your life. And that doesn't mean you have to be completely different or like independent from other people, but you need to be able to have the feeling that you control your own life and that you can make your own decisions, and it's not everything made for you.
Oh, like the autonomy,
Yeah.
autonomy you mentioned,
Yeah.
is also the central part of the theory of self-determination.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I'm talking about now.
Yeah,
The theory of
yeah.
self-determination. And then you also need competence. So you should be able, which is similar, I think, to the perception of behavioral control, right? So you need to have control of the outcome, because if you don't, why would you even do it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's similar, because the behavioral control, it's kind of the same. If you feel like, I need to quit smoking, for example, and you say like, that's super difficult, I can't do it, well, then you probably won't even try, or you won't put in enough effort, something like that. And they also say relatedness is important for the self-determination theory. So if you can imagine what someone else has for feelings, or maybe how do you call it? What is one of the names of the theory of planned behavior? Intention, I think. Attitude. Yeah. For example, you understand the attitudes of the other people, then it might be easier to make these kind of decisions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think. So I think it's similar, but it's slightly different. I think.
Yeah.
The theory.
There is maybe a development from one by one.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, I think that's it for me.
Okay.
Maybe we didn't do full like 15 minutes, but I think.
Oh, okay. Daisy, maybe we can end our discussion.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.